Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our fourth installment of our Avery Digital Classroom. My name is Darren Lee Calhoun II. I am the Facilities Outreach and Public Programming Coordinator of the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture. Um, First, I would like to thank everybody for coming back out. I'm sure many of you have heard of the unfortunate events we had on our last attempt of having an event at the Avery through our digital classroom platform. However, as the great philosophers once says, I thought I told you that we won't stop and we will never stop. So again, I would like first to thank the Avery staff, everybody for coming out. Well, I would like to thank the Avery staff first and foremost, my great outreach assistant, Miss Courtney Hicks, who's been helping me through everything over the past few weeks and actually over this last year. I don't know what we would do without her. Our archivist, Aisha Heichel, Georgette Mayo, as well as Erica Ville, our students that work tirelessly for us, as well as our office manager, Miss Savannah Frierson. We have a very small staff, but we're able to put together so many events and do so many things for the community, and we couldn't do it without you all. Also, I'd like to thank Dr. Anthony Greene for helping us moderate this conversation. He's been a great, and tremendous friend to the Avery Research Center, and I don't know what what have done without him over the last few years, as well as my Morehouse brother, my friend, Mr. Bakari Sellers. I'm sure when we get to the bio, you'll see all the accomplishments. There's so many things we can say about Mr. Sellers, but we appreciate him coming on to facilitate this event, as well as look forward to hearing more about some of the things he has coming up in the future. And I will also have an announcement about that soon. Also, we wouldn't be able to transform over to this new platform without the Office of Information Technology at the College of Charleston, particularly Mr. Will DeWitt. He has helped us over the past couple of weeks, and Mr. Mark Staples, the director, Vice President of Information Technology. They have helped us tremendously over these last few weeks, and we are forever indebted to them. Following everything that happened last week, everything seems a little different. It's only a forward-facing platform that we have right now. But you can still participate and engage with us through the chat box over to your right. Just type in your name, send any questions, and we'll get to the questions and answer at the end. We look forward to seeing you at our other events. We have one event tomorrow. It's a brown bag conversation looking at the Center for Studying Slavery at the College of Charleston, and that will be moderated by our manager of archival services, Miss Aisha Heichel, and that will be tomorrow at 12 o'clock. And you can register for that event. We'll put the link inside of the chat room as well. And we have a few other events coming up in May, so please look out for our email that has a list of all of our events coming up. And we look forward to seeing everyone come out. So before we get started, I'm going to read the bios of everyone, and I'm going to send it over to Dr. Anthony Greene to start the conversation. First, Mr. Bakari Sellers. Bakari Sellers made history in 2006 when, at 22 years old, he defeated a 26-year incumbent state representative to become the youngest member of the South Carolina state legislature and the youngest African-American elected official in the nation. In 2014, he was a Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor in the state of South Carolina, earning his undergraduate degree from the great Morehouse College, where he served as student body president, and his law degree from the University of South Carolina. Sellers has followed the footsteps of his father, civil rights leader Cleveland Sellers, and his tireless commitment to service, taking championing progressive policies to address issues ranging from education and poverty to preventing domestic violence and childhood obesity. His impressive list of accomplishments, in addition to having served on President Barack Obama's South Carolina Steering Committee during the 2008 election, Sellers is widely considered to be a rising star within the Democratic Party and leading voice for his generation. That, coupled with his uncommon ability to reach across the aisle and get things done, has led to numerous accolades, including being named to Time Magazine's 40 Under 40 in 2010, as well as 2014 and 15, the Route 100 list of the nation's most influential African Americans. He has served as a featured speaker at events for the National Education Association, College Democrats of American National Convention, the 2008 and 2016 Democratic National Convention. Sellers practices law with the Stromline Firm, LLC, in Columbia, South Carolina, and is a political commentator at CNN. He is married to Dr. Ellen Rucker Sellers. And another quick bit, Dr. Cleveland Sellers' collection is housed at the Avery Research Center, so we look forward to having Bakari's things come down to the Avery soon as well. Again, and on to Dr. Anthony Greene. Dr. Anthony D. Greene is an associate professor of African American Studies and Sociology at the College of Charleston. He received his BA and MA in Sociology and African American Studies from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. In 2008, he earned his PhD in sociology with a concentration in race ethnic relations from the University of Miami. His current areas of research examine the cultural and ethnic identities among Black populations throughout the African diaspora. He is particularly interested in how Blackness is being redefined in the 21st century. More specifically, he has a vested interest in the ways that Black people throughout the United States and Caribbean experience and reinforce what it means to be Black in the 21st century America. Since his arrival at the College of Charleston, he has taught an array of courses such as Introduction to African American Studies, Race Relations in the U.S., Black Images in the Media, Comparative Black Identity, Black Masculinity and Manhood, Racism in America, Race and the Black Sporting Experience, Africana Studies Research Methods, and he has been a significant advocate for many of the student groups and organizations, particularly marginalized groups at the College of Charleston. He has worked extensively with the Avery Research Center, the Office of Institutional Diversity, Black Student Union, and the Student Affairs to coordinate specific ways to address issues of equity, respectability, and racism that negatively affect students of color. In his continued advocacy for equality and social justice, he makes a daily attempt to live by the following quote: "When better is possible, good is not enough." So without further ado, we'll send you over to Dr. Anthony Greene, and we look forward to engaging with everyone at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. I appreciate that introduction. Again, welcome everyone to this online discussion with Mr. Bakari Sellers. Mr. Sellers, it's an esteemed pleasure and honor to be on this platform with you to discuss your documentary, as well as some other things that may come up in conversation. To move straight into this discussion, I wanted to open up with looking at the documentary. It opens up with the discussion about, or you giving a talk to honor the 50th anniversary of the Orangeburg massacre. What prompted you and the film crew to kind of start at that point?
Well, first, let me begin by saying the two most important words in the English language, which are the words "thank you," and they're not nearly said enough. Before I begin, Anthony, I want to say thank you to Darren and his crew, and the College of Charleston for having us and helping us put this on together. And since we're quoting great American poets, I'll quote the great American poet Sean Carter that said, "Everyone, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us this evening." And so I just want to say thank you for that as well. I will say that I did not edit this film. This film was actually produced and edited by Emily Harold, a young lady from Orangeburg, South Carolina. In the first scene in the documentary, though, I am speaking at the 50th anniversary of the Orangeburg massacre, and I will tell you that it was a speech I did not want to give. I tried my damnedest to not give that speech. I actually helped facilitate invitations to Barack and Michelle Obama, Kamala Harris, Deval Patrick, Cory Booker, everyone. However, the United States Senate was in session. The former First Lady and President were unable to make it into Orangeburg at that time. And so Bill Hine, who's one of your counterparts at South Carolina State, who was chair of the committee, he said, "Bakari, will you go give it?" I did not want to do it because I knew it was going to be a very difficult speech for me to give. It's always a really difficult speech for me to give, especially with my father in the audience. And I think that because my life has been bookended by tragedy, from the Orangeburg massacre to the Charleston massacre, I find it appropriate that we started there. I always tell people that February 8th, 1968 was the most important day of my life, although it happened some 16 years before I was born. And so when that scene hits, we're off and running, and it also shows the very emotional side of who I am.
On that very note, one of the things that I've come across in my professional career, particularly here in South Carolina, I'm originally from North Carolina, so I always carry this North Carolina bias with me when talking about the Carolinas. I was an African American Studies major, and so I knew about student protests, massacres on several different campuses. You know, Kent State tends to get all the national attention and the national celebration. But my time here at the College of Charleston teaching Introduction to African American Studies, as well as some of the other courses Darren mentioned, when I bring up the Orangeburg Massacre, it's revealing, it's unsettling, and it's kind of disappointing that most of my students, Black and white, have no idea about the Orangeburg Massacre, but even those who are from South Carolina. So I thought it was a very powerful point to start the documentary there, and I would hope that story is widespread. But again, I'm finding that almost routinely every semester that I teach about the Orangeburg Massacre, my students are really clueless. Now, I've had a handful of students who tell me. Let
me jump in first. North Carolina's barbecue is trash. I just need to say that for the record and throw that out there. I mean, you can come. I'm glad you're in South Carolina, so you can.
We're not going to get into that discussion. Come on.
We'll take you to King Street and let you get some real barbecue. But I digress. You know,
go that way.
The difficulty for me is I always tell people I think I'm a lot angrier than my father about the incidents of that night. Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton, of course, didn't have to die, and 28 others didn't have to get their lives forever altered and their dreams forever deferred. And one of the things that Governor McNair did, I find a great deal of irony in my life story and my father's life story, that my father was incarcerated, and I use my words extremely carefully, and it's a choice to use these words, but he was incarcerated by a Democratic president in Robert McNair. And he was pardoned by a Republican president in Carroll Campbell. Governor McNair did everything he could in his power to find a scapegoat, which was my father, and also cover this up as much as he possibly could. And so there's no excuse for it now, but just know that the history has never been clear or written, and there's never been an investigation into this matter. And so we're doing some things, hopefully, to shine some light on that, as you said. And thank you for teaching it, because that's the only way that the young minds will be able to grasp the violence that happened 90 miles away from their campus.
Absolutely. And like I said, I'm in this privileged position to have been a major in African American Studies and I teach this information, I teach this history. And so I speak heavily on Orangeburg, but I also bring in like Jackson State and North Carolina A&T, where all these other incidents during that time period, the Black campus movement of the 1960s, where you would have, these incidents on campuses where state troopers are shooting into dormitories, for example, as well as, students losing their lives and didn't necessarily have to, and they're literally written out of the history books. So yes, I'm glad to hear that, you were continuing the efforts and the work of your father. Going through the documentary, some of the things that I just want to kind of talk about, maybe ask you a few questions about some of the things that jumped out at me and how it's relative to some of the things that I do on campus. And then we can tie it in with the end of your plans for the future. But at one point in the documentary, you saw some tweets. I believe they were tweets. So I'm jumping in head first into the issue of racism and American racism in South Carolina. That's what Darren and students on this live feed know that's what I do. But there was some blatant racism. And I believe you were looking through some of your Twitter feeds or just social media feeds overall. How did you deal with that, particularly during your campaign trails? I mean, I can make some assumptions, but can you articulate some of your personal feelings about that, what transpired?
Sure. And so, my frame of reference, I tell everyone I'm a child of the civil rights movement. And so that's the lens by which I view the world. right? And that's the way in which I analyze and look at things in a very forward-facing manner. With that, my father's best friend in life was Stokely Carmichael Kwame Ture. My son, who you may end up hearing run around this house before the end of our hour together this evening. So just know that he and his sister. My son is named Stokely in honor of Stokely Carmichael. But oftentimes people don't even know what the word racism truly means. They don't know what it means when someone is being racist. And Stokely defined it as such. He said that if someone wants to lynch me, then that's their problem. But if they have the power to lynch me, then that's my problem. And so racism is a power construct more than anything else. And I say all of that to say that when I'm dealing with individuals, I don't get caught up in the sensationalized someone calling me nigger. That happens every day, like 15 times a day via social media or being on CNN or people's emails, etc. But I get my life's goal and the missions and the things that I attempt to do are break down these systems of oppression that we live under and that African Americans, people of color, and poor people have to deal with on a daily basis. The best example I can give you is I'm from Denmark, South Carolina. And I was on with Christiane Amanpour the other night. It was a special on PBS and CNN. It was jointly produced. And we were talking about COVID-19 to kind of bring it forward and why are so many African Americans dying. And, I can't get caught up whether or not it was those tweets, those racist tweets that you saw in emails that you saw in the movie, or whether or not it was when I was running for office back in 2006 and I was 21 years old and people would call my house and make threats late at night and say, tell that nigga to get out the race. I can't focus on those things or let those things deter me, because in Denmark, you not only on the outskirts of the footprint of the corridor of shame. We not only in 2010 lost our hospital, so you don't have access to quality care. You also don't have clean water comparable to that of Flint, Michigan. We live in a food desert. So you have all of these systems of oppression that layer. Now we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? And so you have all of these systems of oppression that you cannot get bogged down in that sensationalized rhetoric, because you're forward facing and fighting those systems. And I learned that whether or not it's the right way to do it or not, only time will tell, and hopefully my life will be a testament to that. But I learned that from those lessons learned from people like Julian Bond and Marion Barry and Kathleen Cleaver and Stokely Carmichael.
I agree with you 100% in the notion that racism is a power construct. And like I said, when I teach my courses, again, Darren mentioned that I'm teaching a class in the upcoming semester on racism in America. It's called Racism and White Supremacy. And I start off by talking about the history of how racism was constructed as a power construct, again, to place specifically African Americans historically, but also other people of color and poor people, to your point, that it's not this individual, someone calling you a racial slur. Like, yes, that's the sensationalized version of it, and you may be offended by it, but it is these systems of oppression that continues to keep people of color, poor people, African Americans in particular, at a disadvantage. And you brought up the pandemic. I wasn't going to ask you about that, but I was going to. Since you brought it up, would you mind giving us some detail about that conversation you had with PBS about how, sure, again, the pandemic is structured with this inequality of health access, the inequality of, like you said, food deserts, and then you have people like, who was it? Was it Van Jones recently is being kind of attacked with some of his comments about, we're pointing to the individual African American as the issue in what they need to do. And also the Surgeon General, correct? The Surgeon General came out first and made some kind of comments about, think about your nana or something like that. But you mind speaking to some of that?
Sure. So, I think that I just view it differently than some of my colleagues and even the Surgeon General, because I give more weight to the systemic oppression and systemic racism we have in this country than others do. I don't think this is an issue of personal responsibility. I think that when you live in the doldrums of poverty, When you're not drinking clean water or breathing in clean air, you have a higher likelihood of getting asthma. When the only grocery store you have, the cheapest product you have, are the 19-cent Kool-Aid package, you stretch it with sugar, right? You stretch it with sugar in a gallon of water. That's how we grew up. What does that mean? You're more likely to get diabetes. We live along what's called the stroke belt, where we have these preventable illnesses, but we don't have access to care. I mean, so it's like, you don't go to you have to be sick or near death to go to a hospital. It's not because of a want, but because of the lack of anybody actually, being there or being that type of care around. And so that's the way I grew up. And so I look at this from saying what the age-old saying actually is. When America gets a cold, Black folk get the flu. And in this case, when America got corona, Black folk died and are dying. I mean, it's a present participle. And so for me, I think that this it's amazing to me because, as you probably are aware, and the students who are watching, it's very hard to have conversations around race because people get emotional. And the first thing people want to say is, I'm not racist, right? Like that's their like default mechanism. Like when you have a conversation about race, the first thing anybody wants you to realize is that they're not racist, and that conversation usually doesn't go well. But now we have data, and we have data that shows that, a lot of like Williamsburg County, Clarendon County, Kershaw County, Richland County, a lot of these places in South Carolina that have high instances of death and mortality and drastic sickness are predominantly Black. And it's pulling back the covers on what we already knew were the injustices all around us. So you can say it's, don't go outside and drink and smoke. But Black folk, if you look at the statistics, don't drink and smoke at a higher rate than their white counterparts, right? And so, let's have a real conversation. And I'm not a proponent of respectability politics. I'll leave that to Bill Cosby and others. And so, sometimes we go in divergent paths when we're having these discussions. But my biggest problem with the Surgeon General is this: when you are the lone African American in the room, you have to speak forcefully and display some characteristics of leadership and some traits of leadership and courage to ensure that our people have a voice at the table. Because you probably use this saying in North Carolina. I know we use it in South Carolina and further on down in the South. But if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And for him to be at the table and not speak forcefully was disappointing. And I've had private conversations with him and let him know that.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Data. Again, I'm a sociologist by training, so I'm heavy into looking at the data and the trends, and everything that you spoke of is absolutely correct. What we're seeing within the data is what Black folk and folk have been talking about for years, for decades, whether it's in education, healthcare, so forth and so on. And so one of the things that kind of tie back into the documentary, speaking of data, one of the things that was captured was I can't really remember if it was you had an episode of fatigue that you was dealing with something physically or psychologically or physiologically. And so that just kind of prompted me thinking about this notion of Black men and mental health. That is a very popular topic now. Charlemagne the God, who is from Goose Creek, who's on the Breakfast Club, he talks extensively about therapy and mental health. And again, tying it into some of the data, young Black boys, I want to say Black boys between the ages of 10 and 14 or 10 and 18 have the highest rate of suicide. Black men, variety of ages, have there's a growing population of Black men suffering from depression. But yet with the socialized way in which we think about gender, Black men are not supposed to kind of reveal those, internal emotions, internal feelings that can be subject to domestic violence. You brought up domestic violence, subject to suicide, mental health, and other physical health issues. So when you were dealing with some of those things, like I said, I can't recall 100% what that thing was, But I do remember there was a moment that you had an episode. You mind speaking to that a little
Yeah,
bit?
sure. I almost passed out because I realized I hadn't eaten in a couple of, in a day. And, in the campaign, you go, 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 go. But in my book that I have coming out in 3 weeks, My Vanishing Country, I actually talk about dealing with anxiety. And one of the chapters I have is anxiety, a Black man's superpower. And I talk about it not being a concept that is accepted in our communities or in our homes. And we have to do a better job of talking about it, especially during this quarantine period, because people are stuck in their heads and their thoughts without many outlets. There is no going to church and getting where most Black folk get some sense of comfort from. There's no going to church and getting those hugs from the church ladies in the front row when you're going through things. Sometimes those church lady hugs, they get you through. There's no going through the gym. For a lot of men who are the head of their household, they lose jobs during this time period and don't know when they're going to get their jobs back. They've been furloughed. That breeds, if you combine that with, mental health issues they're already not dealing with, that breeds violence in the household. And so you just have one of the things I wanted to do by kind of talking about that. And, I was very emotional in the documentary, but coming out and just talking about it forcefully in my book is I wanted to show particularly Black men, but people in general, that it's okay to talk about mental health and it's okay to talk about these issues. Charlemagne is one of my best friends. I talk to Charlemagne every single day. And, we have these conversations about mental health because we want to ensure that our brothers in particular are participating in these healthy discussions so we can have more healthy relationships and be more productive. And this world is hard. I don't know if you just saw in the New York Times, I believe it was yesterday, there was an article written about a case in Brunswick, Georgia, where a young man was running through the neighborhood and he was, it was a good old fashioned South Georgia father-son lynching, right? The father and son just gunned him down and shot him. And the case was kicked by the Brunswick DA and went to another DA. And, those kind of traumatic occurrences give Black men in particular something that I think you talk about and teach about, which is PTSD. But you refer to it and take the origin back even further. In your scholastic journey. And so I think that one of the things I wanted to do and one of the things I'm unashamed about is just talking about mental health. And, we traced it all the way back to my father going to prison. My father was shot. My father went to prison. He had to bear the burden in the state of 3 young men who were killed. One who was a really good friend of his. My sister, all of our names are Swahili. My sister's middle name is Abademe, which means born while father is away, because my sister was my dad was at CCI, which is the Columbia Correctional Institute. And the first time he met my sister on the prison yard. And so that trauma of having from my mom, for an example, to have your husband go through trial and be sentenced to prison, and you're pregnant and you give birth by yourself, and you're worrying about a husband who's in prison and jail, having to live with that, and you have a newborn. I mean, all of those things give you a lineage of trauma and dealing with those things. And I think it's healthy and necessary for us to talk about those things.
Absolutely. Dr. Joy DeGroy is a psychologist, social worker, I believe. I use a lot of her work in my classes, and she refers to it as the post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And how all these other forms of systematic as well as physical traumas that Black people have experienced coming from enslavement haven't been, they haven't been treated. Right, and so you have some of the things that you just described, meeting your child while in prison and how that impacts the child-parent relationship, or having a child by yourself, or the history of Black women in rape, for example, from enslavement. How she's articulating and evidence supported this, that it's in the DNA, right? So all of the symptoms that are associated with PTSD that we ascribe to military veterans, it is identical to the remnant, so to speak, of enslavement. So I'm glad you are speaking to that. And in the class that I teach on Black masculinity and manhood, I have a long, lengthy section on talking about mental health. And what was interesting, not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but what was interesting when I first taught the class, but let me back up. There was a Black masculinity workshop, some type of workshop that was taking place on campus in the spring. I was approached by some of the Black male students at College of Charleston about having a class on Black masculinity. And I was like, I've been thinking about teaching a class on Black masculinity. So I offered a class on Black masculinity. I had it set up thinking, you know, of the 25 students, it's going to be dominated by the Black men on campus. I walk in on the first day, out of 25 students, 20 are Black women. So immediately I had to kind of shift some of the way in which I, delivered the instruction. I didn't change necessarily the content. But nonetheless, when I got to the the mental health part, I literally had some of my students, come to me in tears, saying they had no clue that Black men dealt with so much in terms of self-esteem, anxiety, the data on suicides, and it prompted me to actually put together a program that we brought in a Black male psychologist, one of the few in the state of North Carolina, who came down and had a whole workshop talking about, a lot of the things that you just talked about and mentioned. And he actually was on the Breakfast Club show with Charlamagne the God maybe 2 years ago.
And let me just say this as well. I think that we have to begin to have these conversations before Black folk get to college campuses, because we're losing a lot early on in the home. And one of the things that we showed in the documentary, and I talk about in my book and in my journey of life, is I was blessed enough to have 2 educators as parents. And what we try to do is give a safe haven to, others in the neighborhood as well. And I think it's necessary, especially in early childhood education, that we're having these discussions. But, Black folk go through a lot in this country, period, including Black women. And I don't want anyone watching to think that we're leaving them out of the discussion, because I also want to be known as someone who champions Black women, especially when it comes to African-American female mortality. One of the things that wasn't in my documentary, and it is in the book, but when my twins were born, Sadie and Stokely, my wife almost died. She literally bled out and hemorrhaged and had to go in the first 36 hours of my children's life. She was in ICU, and a lot of that, you want to talk about race and its impact. African-American female mortality is a perfect starting point. The reason being is because it crosses over all socioeconomic backgrounds. It doesn't matter if you're Serena Williams or Ellen Sellers or if you're on Medicaid. It doesn't matter at all. Your voices, Black women's voices, when they're giving birth, simply are not heard. And so, the stresses that we go through. So I want people to be able to breathe and hope, but breathe and be able to, a lot of times in order to breathe, you have to be willing to speak and share your story. And so personally, I'm glad you're down there pushing the envelope, because I know at the College of Charleston, that may not be something that's a comfortable conversation to have, but it's definitely a necessary one.
Yeah, it possesses its own challenges, but we're trying to maintain and, as you said, push the envelope. But to that last point you made, that I do want to be on record saying that I'm also a champion and advocate for Black women in health and reproductive rights, just Black women in equality. Like you said, we're seeing the covers of America, structural forms of racism and sexism unfolding. One of my students, one of our majors, is actually, she was a recipient of the Avery fellowship, or the scholarship that they do, and she was looking specifically at Black women mortality during childbirth. So it's interesting that you brought that up, and it goes back to that core fundamental belief, historical belief, that Black people just don't experience pain as much, and that comes from a real structural historical platform. So I won't go down that road, but yes, I'm glad you are bringing that to the forefront as well. Darren, how are we doing on time? I hadn't been following the clock. Okay. Well, I guess I can circle back to I thought somebody said something. I'm sorry. No,
I said you have
okay.
10 minutes. 10 minutes.
Okay, I saw Darren. Okay. So I do want to kind of close it out and circle back to you personally in terms of your endeavors, but also tied into some of the history. And Darren, when Darren was reading your biography and highlighting that you were the first African American, and in the documentary you also talk about being one of the first African Americans since Reconstruction. Dr. Henry Louis Gates put out a documentary looking specifically at Black during Reconstruction and how they flooded the political arena. And here in South Carolina, there's a number of historical figures, African American figures who were some of the first, Robert Small, so forth and so on. So after 2014 and moving into 2020, if I'm not moving too far ahead with what Darren wanted to speak to, what are some of your future plans? You said you have a book coming out. I'm sure you're still doing speaking endeavors. Well, whenever America opens back up, you'll be back on the lecture circuit. But what are your plans in the future, particularly as it relates to in politics specifically?
So it's ironic you bring that up because when I was running in 2014, I wanted to be the first African American elected statewide in South Carolina since 1876. 1876 was a long time ago for anybody who isn't paying attention. And to be the irony in that is that two Black folk were running against each other for lieutenant governor. There was a Black Democrat and a Black Republican who were running against each other in 1876, the last time a Black person had won statewide. I will say that Tim Scott actually won his race in 2014. So Tim Scott became the first African American elected since Reconstruction statewide. And partisan politics aside, I genuinely like Tim Scott. Tim served with me. It's hard nowadays to say put politics aside, but for the purposes of this discussion, we give each other hell over some of the political positions, but I genuinely think his heart is in a really good place. And so that was an interesting phenomenon. Two Negroes, coloreds as they would call it at the time, were running against each other. As for me now, I think that the documentary kind of gave it a ... And documentary was supposed to be over after I lost my race, ironically, and then Charleston happened. I lost in 2014. Charleston happened in the summer of 2015, and I got hired by CNN. And currently, I still am doing my CNN job. It's an awesome, in the truest meaning of the word awesome, opportunity to be on CNN. Denmark has 3,300 people in it. 3,300. That's where I'm from. And every night I speak to about 1 million of my closest friends when I'm on Don Lemon or Chris Cuomo. I mean, that's just an amazing feeling. And so that's first. I love what I'm doing. My book comes out in 3 weeks from today, and I'm so excited about it. So I hope everyone, I know that Darren and the Avery Research Center have been gracious and are doing some things. So thank you so much for that. But call your parents and tell them to go pick it up. I mean, I will tell you, Anthony, I've shared this with Darren. It's very difficult for a Black male to find a home writing in this time. If you're not people who I love and adore, like I'm very close with T.D. Jakes, and I don't know Ta-Nehisi, but I know his father. Mark Lamont Hill, I know very well. Michael Eric Dyson is like a mentor. I speak to Michael Eric Dyson all the time. If you're not one of those brand names, it's really difficult to break in. And so this being my first foray, I'm hopeful that, and maybe you use some of the books for your class, but we'll talk about that later. But I'm itching to get back into politics. One of the things that I remind people is I got elected when I was 21 years old. I served my entire 20s in the South Carolina State House of Representatives, and the fishbowl kind of phenomenon, living in a fishbowl and everybody gets to see every move that you make, was one that I'm glad that I'm out of for a period of time. I recognize something that many people laugh at, but it's so true. I realized I wasn't nearly as important as I thought I was, which people sometimes need to go through that cleansing. And so now I'm looking forward to the right opportunity to run for the United States Congress in the 6th Congressional District, which is right there where we are, Denmark and portions of Charleston and Bamberg, Orangeburg, et cetera, all the way up 26. And when that opportunity comes, whether or not it's 2022 or a little bit beyond, we're itching to get back in it. I'm eyeing 2022 as my next run, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully I can shave by then and go outside, but we'll see.
Oh, who you telling? I can't wait to get back to the barber shop.
I know. My friends in Georgia, they sneak into the barber, but I swear I'm not gonna die for a $15 haircut. I just can't do it.
Not at all. Not at all. You and me both. You and me both. I'll go on summer without one if that's the case. All right. So, Mr. Sellers, I really do appreciate your time. I'm at the end of the list of questions and conversations that I wanted to have. I can pass it over a few minutes early to Darren and the Avery staff for questions. And we can get right into
it. Great, thank you, and thank you to both of you. That was amazing. That's everything that we was hoping for. And we're going to go ahead and get to the questions. As Bakari stated, we are working on some things for our community. As everyone knows, when we did bring down Ta-Nehisi Coast down to Charleston, or we brought Marion Wright Edelman and Brian Stevenson's, the Avery was gracious and was able to sponsor book buys for the community. We always want to share our wealth of information to our people. So I'm proud to announce the first 50 people who actually registered for this event will receive a free hardcover of Bakari's new book that's coming out in May, as well as we're working on trying to get ebooks for people so we can distribute those even sooner to our people to go ahead and read the book and process the information and get back to us and let us know how you feel about it, and send out to everyone and tell your friends to go ahead and get the book as well. So more information will be coming out on that very, very, very soon. So look out to your emails. I'm now going to pass it over to one of our students at the Avery Research Center, Miss Adia Benin. She is a sophomore political science major. I might be making that up. A political science major. She introduced herself over to you, and she's going to be start answering the questions over that we have inside of our chat room, and some that we've been receiving through email since some people haven't grasped our new technology yet. So, Adia.
Thank you, Darren, for that introduction. Thank you, Bakari and Dr. Greene as well for that discussion. It was very well talked about, and I enjoyed it. We're going to start with our first question. This is for Dr. Greene and Mr. Sellers. So how do you think we can use the current COVID crisis to elevate the issue of health equity and racial health disparities?
Well, my hope is that with the urgency of people dying, that this is something that we can use and follow the data to back it up. I think that's very important, so people don't think we're talking out the side of our neck when we're talking about these disparities. But we have to deal with the systemic issues. We have to deal with the systems of oppression that Black folk and brown folk and poor folk are living in this country, especially right here throughout the South. The state with the highest death rate, not number, it's fourth in terms of number of people that died, but the highest death rate is Alabama, and the majority of which of those are people of color. And so once you look at that, my hope is that, you have people like Kamala Harris and Nick Mosby from Baltimore, and even Joe Biden now are talking about these systems, and hopefully this is something that is very scholarly. It fits well on Twitter, but it's something that we have to dig down deeper in. And I always tell people that you cannot have race neutral fixes for race specific problems. And so the government, what they try to do is, through their stimulus and everything else, is put these huge packages together that are, rising tide lifts all boats. But the problem is very race specific. And until you infuse race specific dollars or create structural changes that are race specific, you will never be able to fix many of the race specific problems we have in this country.
Yeah, I don't have much to reiterate that. That was essentially what I would have said. Yeah, until we address some of those systemic problems, until we address how for example, gentrification plays a part into this equation. Yeah, we're just putting a Band-Aid on the bullet wound.
So here's our next question. When President Obama was elected, we heard the term post-racial society a lot. Do you believe that this can ever truly be possible? How have your experiences in government and politics informed this belief?
So I am a huge fan of 44. I say that because I'm about to be critical, but I'm a huge fan of 44. You probably won't find a bigger fan of 44. I do think that he made some relatively glaring mistakes. One was in Syria, the other was when it came to HBCUs, right? But that's because that was more of a cultural issue than anything else. He just didn't necessarily understand the value of historically Black colleges and universities. And whenever I'm starting the discussion with explaining to you the value of an HBCU, this conversation always goes sideways. I don't really know what a post-racial society is. To me, that sounds like we're going down the pathway of colorblindness, which I think is a cop-out, and I think is one of the most intellectually lazy themes we can talk about when discussing race. I think the president realized quickly, though, that we were nowhere near that. My biggest problem, though, is not necessarily the way society wants us to interpret the Obama era. Barack Obama came from a very different background culturally, and all I'm saying by that is that he didn't grow up Black in the South like I did, right? And so he grew up in Hawaii and Kansas, and so his upbringing and his interactions were different. But one of the things I think he realized extremely quickly is that race did play a huge factor. The 2010 Tea Party, his interactions with Mitch McConnell and others showed that we had not come as far as people thought we were. And the last thing I want people to understand is because Barack Obama got elected, somehow we made it. That's not the case at all. I take great pride in Barack Obama and Barack Obama being president, but I want people to understand, but because he got elected doesn't mean that we made anything.
Oh, I thought the question was specifically geared to Mr. Sellers. I'll say that, I'll make it quick, that, Chris Rock once said, if we really think that because of the election of Barack Obama, and I'm paraphrasing here, is the point in America that Mr. Sellers said that we've made it, we're essentially saying that throughout America's history, there's only been one Black person educated enough, with enough experience and everything that it takes to be president. There's only been one Black person in American history to fulfill that role, and that was Barack Obama. If that's what we were saying, it's post-racial, then again, like you said, that's a very lazy cop-out. I mean, it's lazy intellectually to even discuss it. I talk about post-racial society in my society, this myth of post-racial society, and going back to data. I mean, if you just look at the data from the time that he was in office and the time that he was out of office, from mass incarceration, shooting deaths to unarmed Black and brown people, men, women, and children. Again, those things started to become more prevalent and skyrocket. So these are not things that magically went away because Barack Obama was elected.
Our third question. How do you feel this crisis will affect HBCUs, and what do you believe is the responsibility of the government to help our schools wade the storm?
Well, I mean, I think that the government has a huge role to play in helping people navigate this storm. I mean, institutions that are public, and even more so, the state is shut down. Revenue has stopped being generated, and so the federal government has to step in and plug those holes. I have a huge fear that some HBCUs may not survive, and the ones that do survive may not last much longer after. Because of that, it's hard to come to an abrupt stop, and you don't have. I mean, schools are talking about going virtually the first semester of next year, which is difficult when you can't do the maintenance and you don't get the room and board dollars necessary. You already don't have deferred maintenance monies coming in from the state or whomever. And schools that don't have large endowments, the schools that aren't Spelman, Morehouse, FAM, Hampton, Howard, that don't have these larger endowments, we have to, and well, Claflin is a phenomenal school. They were left in great shape by their last president. we have to do everything we can. And this is when we get back on our feet. We have to make sure that alumni giving starts ticking up, and we're able to support our own institutions. But I'm afraid, truly.
Yeah, I also agree. I mean, it goes back to one of the points you said earlier, that when America gets cold, Black people get the flu. And so we have, prominent public white institutions who are going to feel the brunt of this, economic blow. And if they can't survive, you can only imagine some of the HBCUs will have suffered some of the same fate.
So on that note of Mr. Sellers said about the alumni giving needs to try to support those schools. How important is unity in our community in a time like this with our lives as we know it?
I don't know what unity really looks like or what that means per se. I will always tell you that Black folk have always had, I don't know if the word is competitive or different ways in which they went about navigating their particular movements. SCLC wasn't CORE wasn't SNCC, SNCC wasn't the Black Panther Party. All of these organizations, and they found their own lane and vessels, but they all pushed progress forward. And so, and remember that all Black folk weren't a part of the movement either. I always tell people that if you come down south, you find 10 Black folk of a certain age, probably above the age of 60, and you count out all 10 of them. All of them will tell you how they marched with King, but less than one of them was actually there, right? And so I remind people often that it's incumbent upon, especially young people, because every movement we've had in this country has been led by young people. SNCC was entirely led by young people, although Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer gave them their guiding light. I mean, the people, those who were doing the work were the young people. Women's rights movement, gay rights movement, every movement we've had in this country were led by young people. And so I'm not too concerned about unity as much as I am making sure that young people know that they can change the world, know that leadership is messy, protest is messy, but it's also lonely. And so it takes all of us to kind of get that willpower in our hearts and minds to know that we too can change the world.
Yeah, I mean,
what do you think about the growing movement focusing on white-on-white discussions to end racism?
White-on-white racism? White-on-white discussions to end racism?
Yes.
Oh, I think white people have to talk to white people to end racism. I tell people that all the time. It's not on Black folk to end racism. I mean, I don't know what role you want me to play to end racism. That's what I tell folk all the time. It doesn't take a room full of Black folk to do this. I think that we do need to have healthier discussions. I don't know if any of y'all have read the book. I'm sure you all have. But White Fragility is a great book. It's just a book that I encourage a lot of my friends to read. And I have, being a Democrat and going through this primary cycle the last 2 years, I have a lot of discussions about race and politics. I have more discussions about race and politics with white progressives than I do with white conservatives. Just talking about racial blind spots and understanding that the intersection of race and economics isn't the end all be all. You can have all the money in the world, but if you're still Black, you're going to still have many of the same societal pressures, ills, and wrongs that you have. The perfect example of that is Philando Castile, who did everything right, but was still gunned down by law enforcement. And so, I do think there need to be some real soul searching, and you called them white-on-white conversations. I've literally never heard that phrase before, but that's pretty dope. I do think that there needs to be some conversations that don't include us. But Dr. Greene is better positioned to answer that than I am.
Yeah, it's funny that question pops up. In my class, I asked one of their required essays is to answer the question, what is white America's responsibility in ending racism? And I assigned them a chapter from the book on white fragility. And it's interesting to see the responses from my white students versus my Black students. So again, a lot of the Black students say, white people need to step up to the plate And a lot of the white students are kind of enamored that this thing that they have been experiencing, they didn't know it was called, they didn't have the terminology, the phrase that was, white fragility. And some are admitted to being, embarrassed and ashamed, and they haven't done much to really address racism, because again, they really see racism as a very individual thing, not a structural thing. So yeah, to Mr. Sellers' point, yeah, Black people have been fighting against racism and inequality and Jim Crow and so forth and so on since the beginning of America's existence, but yet it's still here. Black people collectively do not have power to eliminate the structural forms of racism. So no, it's not going to fall on the shoulders of Black folks. Black folks have been carrying the torch. But yeah, it's time for white America to have a serious conversation and serious agenda and platform to address ways in which to eliminate racism and all the other isms and privileges that they tend to experience.
Thank you.
And yes, White Fragility is a book that needs to be read, and needs to be purchased. So I am promoting White Fragility also. It's a wonderful book.
Great, thank you, everyone. Do we have any last words, Dr. Greene and Bakari? Did you want to give any parting words before we end the event? Bakari?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I simply want to say that, what happened last week, the history of the Avery Research Center, us being here today, it all ties in together. The strength and commitment you all have to having discussions and pulling people together. I know Will is on mute down there, but even bringing Will in to make this event go forward, the organization that you plan this, the type of organization that you dedicated to this, and the professionalism of programs like this, it shows that we can have good, healthy discussions that people can learn from and move forward. And so I would simply kind of end where I began, which is to simply say thank you. I have to give a shameless plug again to my Vanishing country. We really want to do well in 3 weeks. So thank you for your help with that, Darren and Avery, and to everyone who's joined us today. Please Google it, Audible it, tell your parents about it. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I just simply say thank you for the time and the platform to have these discussions. These are the type of discussions that continues to need to be had. You all experienced the Zoom bomb, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with what happened at USC last week or earlier this week, a similar incident. So yes, we need to continue to push the envelope forward in addressing these racial ills of America. So thank you again for the time and the platform. And I appreciate the opportunity to meet and talk to Bakari Sellers.
Absolutely. We want to thank everyone on the back end over here, from Kieja, Dr. Greene, again, Courtney Hicks, Adia Bennon, Bakari, Josh Willer, who's also with IT, Michelle Resick, and also Will DeWitt, who's helped me a lot, and Alex Schroeder. Like I said, the staff of the Avery Research Center, we have a full-time staff of 6 people, but we pull off miracles every time. I don't know how we do it. Look forward to our upcoming announcement of the new director coming soon. We will one day be back inside of the Avery, but until then, we will have the Avery Digital Classroom. Our work will not stop. Our work hasn't stopped over the last 2.5 years since we've been closed for renovations. We were only open for 2.5 months, but we have great exhibitions coming back one day when we get back in. We're working tirelessly on this end to make sure the community has what they need, and we are that community resource. So again, thank you for coming to the Avery Research Center's Avery Digital Classroom. We look forward to seeing you at our future events. Our next one will be tomorrow, the brown bag conversation starting at 12 o'clock with our manager of archival services, Aisha Heichel, who will be looking at the Center for Studying Slavery at the College of Charleston. Then we have many events coming up. I'm just going to read a few off right now. On May 5th, we're going to have a Netflix party looking at watching the documentary, The Life of Marsha P. Johnson. We will have on May 12th, we have another event featuring the professor at the College of Charleston, Dr. Antron Mahoney, and his event will be looking at the Unbecoming Man, Black Fraternalism, and the Southern Black Queer Counterculture. On May 14th, we will have the State of the People, a discussion with local queer and trans leaders of color, hosted by our Avery's own Vanishing Dieterville. On May 19th, we have Low Country Poets Live, a poetry happy hour. And on May 21st, we're going to tackle this age-old question. Should we have policing in public schools, a virtual town hall hosted by local activists and educators Julie Chi and Candace Livingston. So again, we have a great lineup of events for everyone. We look forward to seeing you all soon, and we will continue to get better at this as technology allows us. If you need anything, you can reach me at calhoundl@cofc.edu, or look out on our Facebook page or reach out to us on any of our social medias. Again, thank you to everyone, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.